She handed him the $10 on a Friday afternoon, and she laughed when she did it. Not a cruel laugh. Not the kind that is trying to wound. It was the kind that escapes when something confirms what you already believe. A small sound, closed mouth, through the nose. The way you laugh at a joke you saw coming from the other side of the room. She had been cleaning out her handbag at the kitchen island when she found the $10 bill folded into the inner pocket behind her credit card sleeve. She held it between two fingers, looked at it the way you look at a coin found in a coat you haven't worn since last winter, and said, "Emmanuel, come." He came from the hallway where he had been waiting since 8:15 that morning. She held the bill out to him. She said, "For your trouble." Then the laugh. Then she turned back to her handbag. He did not know, and she did not know, that the bill she folded out of habit and dismissed with a sound through her nose would sit in the back section of a brown notebook and become for the person carrying it the clearest signal he had received in 9 years that it was time to leave. His name was Emmanuel Akebe. He was 43 years old, 176 centimeters tall, 112 kilograms, a weight he had held for the past 6 years because it had not changed since he stopped eating lunch to save money for the transportation cost to the second job he had worked on Saturdays for 31 months before it ended. He was wearing black trousers and a white button front shirt he had bought from a stall on Broad Street in Lagos for 1,800 naira, ironed every Sunday evening for the week ahead. He owned 3 of these shirts. They were all the same. He rotated them so that each one rested for 2 days between wearings, because he had read somewhere that fabric lasted longer if you gave it time to recover. He had been driving for Mrs. Adenola Bright for 9 years and 4 months. He knew this precisely because he had written the start date, the 8th of September, 9 years ago, in the small brown notebook he kept in the driver's door pocket of the 2019 Mercedes Gull he drove on her behalf. The same notebook where he logged the fuel receipts, the parking fees, the toll charges, the mileage for every trip from the house in Victoria Island to her office on Adeola Odeku Street and back. He had started the notebook because nobody asked him to. He had kept it because, over 9 years, he had understood that the only protection a man in his position had was documentation. The house on Victoria Island was a 5-bedroom detached property behind a gate with a keypad that Mrs. Adenola Bright changed the code on every 3 months without telling Emmanuel. Which meant he rang the bell and waited each time, even on rainy evenings, even when the bags from her boot needed carrying. The house staff were 5 in total: Emmanuel, the house manager Mr. Femi, 2 domestic workers named Blessing and Jinika, and a cook named Patience, who arrived at 6 every morning and left at 3. They knew each other's routines, passed each other on the back stairs, shared a kettle in the kitchen adjacent to the driver's quarters. They did not speak much about anything personal. Emmanuel had worked beside Mr. Femi for 6 years without knowing whether he was married or where he slept when he wasn't on site. That was the texture of the arrangement. You were present without being known. Mrs. Adenola Bright was 56 years old and had inherited her late husband's import business at 49 and had spent the 7 years since multiplying it with the focused efficiency of someone who had always moved close to power and understood its grammar. She was not cruel in the way of someone who enjoyed cruelty. She was indifferent in the way of someone who had long ago stopped keeping accounts of what certain people cost. Emmanuel had watched her, over 9 years, the way you watch someone you spend more waking hours near than almost anyone else without ever being in their world. She was precise with money when it mattered to her. She was careless with it when it did not. The $10 did not matter to her. That was the entirety of the communication. He took the $10 from her fingers. He said, "Thank you, Ma." He folded it once, put it in his shirt pocket, and went back to the hallway. He stood there for 47 seconds. The house was quiet, in the way expensive houses are quiet. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. The faint sound of a television in a room upstairs. The air conditioning units cycling. Then he went down the back stairs to the driver's quarters, which was a room 12 feet by 9 feet behind the generator house, and he sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress had been replaced once. In 2019, the ceiling fan had a wobble in it that made a soft rhythmic knock, once per rotation. He had reported the knock to Mr. Femi 3 separate times. He sat there and held the $10 bill between both palms and looked at it. He was not thinking about the insult. He had made peace long before this Friday with the specific texture of being unseen. What a driver knew, in a house like this one, was the inside of a waiting outside the Civic Center at 12:40 a.m. for a function that had been scheduled to end at 11. Waiting in the Marina car park for 2.5 hours on a Tuesday while a lunch ran past its reservation. Waiting in the driveway while rain came down on the roof of the car in the particular Lagos way. Sudden, total, the kind that turns the gutters into fast-moving channels and makes the compound smell of wet red earth and exhaust. He had sat through each of these with the engine on, the air conditioning running if she had said she would be back soon, and with it off if she had not. And he had used the waiting. What he was thinking about now was a conversation he had overheard 3 months earlier, on a Tuesday morning in October, while he was waiting outside the glass building at 14 Adeola Odeku Street, engine idling, the notebook open on the passenger seat. 2 men had been visible through the lobby glass, speaking with the kind of controlled urgency that people use when the subject is money and the real audience is larger than just the person they're talking to. He had not heard the words. But one of the men had been holding a prospectus, glossy cover, thick paper, a logo in the upper left corner, and when he came out 20 minutes later and walked past the car, the prospectus was tucked under his arm, logo facing outward. Emmanuel read it in the 2 seconds it was visible. A name. A sector, a piece of information he had filed away without consciously deciding to file it. He had been filing things for 9 years. That was one skill the job had given him that Mrs. Adenola Bright did not know she was providing. Time. Long hours parked outside buildings while meetings happened inside. Afternoons at the marina while she lunched. Evenings outside the Civic Center while functions ran past midnight. He had spent those hours reading. In 9 years, from the seat of the Mercedes Glel, Emmanuel Akebe had read 214 books. He kept a running list in the back section of the brown notebook. Title and date completed, 16 entries per page. The list was not an achievement he intended to show anyone. It was a practice, the way a carpenter keeps a hand plane sharp even in seasons when there is no wood to dress. You keep the tool ready. You trust the wood will come. He had read about logistics, about supply chains, about the cold storage infrastructure deficit in Nigeria's fresh produce sector that caused an estimated 40% of perishable goods to spoil between farm and market. He had read the same subject from 6 different angles. Academic papers printed at a business center in Surulere. 2 industry reports downloaded on his phone at 5 naira per megabyte. A memoir by a Kenyan logistics entrepreneur he had found in a second-hand stall at the Balogun market for 200 naira. The book's spine cracked, and the cover water stained, but the pages intact. He had read it twice. He had also read it to Tobena, out loud in sections, over 3 phone calls. Because Tobena did not read books, but understood roads, and Emmanuel had learned that theory and operational knowledge were 2 different instruments that produced nothing alone and something complete together. Over 18 months of reading, he had arrived at a number, not a dream, not an ambition, a specific number. The revenue lost to small-scale farmers in the southwest corridor from spoilage alone was estimated at over 40 billion naira annually. The gap was not just an inefficiency. It was a space the size of an industry, waiting for anyone with the patience and the operational logic to move into it. He looked at the $10 bill. He thought about the notebook. He thought about the logo on the prospectus. He thought about the account at Access Bank under his name, 417,000 naira. Saved over 7 years from the second Saturday job, and from the 200 naira a week he had not spent on lunch. He made a decision. It took 11 seconds. Then he put the $10 bill between the last page of the book list and the back cover of the notebook, and he went upstairs to start the car for Mrs. Adenola Bright's evening engagement. 2 months later, on a Saturday morning in February, he placed his resignation on the kitchen island at 7:30 a.m. A single page, printed at the business center on Adeniran Ogunsanya Street for 50 naira. The driver's quarters were already cleared. His 3 white shirts were folded in a bag at the door. The room behind the generator house was cleaner than it had been the day he moved in. Mrs. Adenola Bright came to the kitchen at 8:04, read the letter, and looked up at him in the doorway. She said, "You're serious?" He said, "Yes, Ma." She said, "What will you do?" He said, "I have a plan." She looked at him the way people look when they are holding a sentence and haven't decided yet what it weighs. She said she would add 2 months' gratuity. He thanked her. He did not tell her what the plan was. He had learned, from watching people manage large amounts of authority over 9 years, that the people who need to explain their plans before they act are still hoping someone will talk them out of it. He was not hoping for that. If this story is already pulling at something in you, if you know the weight of hours spent waiting while the world moves without you, stay with me. Because what Emmanuel did next is not what anyone in that Victoria Island house would have predicted. And what he built from a number in a notebook and a conversation with his brother at a kitchen table in Mushin is the part that changes everything. He took a bus to Surulere, transferred at National Stadium, and arrived at his brother Tobena's flat in Mushin at 11:30 that morning. Tobena was 48 years old, a truck driver for 17 years, and he knew every cold storage facility within a 40-kilometer radius of Lagos the way a cartographer knows terrain, not from a map, but from having driven every road in it. Emmanuel had told him nothing specific on the phone. He had said only, "I need to talk to you about trucks in cold rooms. Are you free Saturday?" Tobena had said yes. They talked from noon until nearly 7 kilo in the evening. Tobena's wife, Ngozi, brought eba and egusi soup at 2 go, and poured water without being asked, and went back to the kitchen. Because she understood that when Tobena's younger brother sat across from him with a notebook open and a pen in his hand, the conversation was the kind that needed to run without interruption. Tobena laid out everything. The cold storage bottleneck at Kilometre 15 on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. The standard 3-day delay between Farmgate and Market in the southwest corridor. The informal broker network that absorbed between 12 and 18% of every transaction without adding a single hour of preservation to the produce. He drew it on a sheet of paper in biro while he talked. Not a formal diagram, just lines and boxes and numbers, and Emmanuel asked questions that sharpened the model each time. The kind of questions that come from reading and then encountering someone who has lived what you only read about. Tobena's sons fell asleep on the couch behind them, while the 2 brothers worked at the kitchen table. By 5:30 they had a route, Ibadan to Ketu Market, 1 refrigerated truck, a tomato cooperative in Abeokuta that Tobena knew from a logistics contact who owed him a phone call. By 6:45 they had a number for the first 6 months of operations. Emmanuel's 417,000 naira would not buy a refrigerated truck. It would not buy half of one, but it would, combined with 200,000 naira from Tobena's own savings, a loan from a cooperative savings society Emmanuel had belonged to for 5 years, and a conversation with a microfinance bank on Bodie Thomas Street. Lease one refrigerated truck for an 18-month term and pay the first 4 months on a cold storage bay at a facility in Isolo. They shook hands at the kitchen table at 8:47 that evening, under a fluorescent light that buzzed faintly on the left side. Tobena said, "If this goes wrong, we lose the money." Emmanuel said, "I know." Tobena said, "Then let's not let it go wrong." The first truck left the tomato cooperative in Abeokuta at 5:12 a.m. On a Monday in April, 2 months after Emmanuel had folded his resignation and placed it on a kitchen island that no longer had anything to do with him. He was in the cab with the driver, a man named Gibenga, whom Tobena had vouched for the way you vouch for someone whose character you would stake your own name on. Emmanuel logged the departure time in the brown notebook, now with a new section at the front for the business, and watched the Abeokuta sky go pale at the edges, and then orange, and then the full flat gray of a morning that had not yet committed to anything. He did not feel triumphant. He felt the specific quality of attention that comes when the thing you have prepared for has finally started moving, and preparation is no longer what matters. The delivery reached Ketu Market at 9:38 a.m. Zero spoilage. Gibenga backed the truck into the bay, while Emmanuel walked the crates to Alhaja Karimat, a trader who had been buying produce at Ketu for 22 years, and who had received Emmanuel's first phone call 6 weeks earlier with the measured skepticism of a woman who had been promised freshness too many times and received rot. She opened the first crate. She pressed 3 tomatoes. She was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, "Come back Wednesday." He came back Wednesday. Then Friday. Then the following Monday with a second consignment, larger, because Alhaja Karimat had spoken to 2 other traders she trusted. The 6th week was the week that nearly ended it. The cold storage sensor that Emmanuel had rigged to the phone holder malfunctioned on a Thursday night. A loose connection at the probe end that nobody caught until the truck was already 2 hours outside Abeokuta on the Friday morning run. The temperature had drifted to 9 degrees Celsius for an undetermined number of hours instead of staying at 4. Emmanuel discovered it at 6:30 a.m. when he called Gibenga for the status update. He stood on the pavement outside the room he was renting in Surulere, a single room on the 3rd floor of a building on Bodie Thomas Street, 9 feet by 11 feet, with a window that looked onto the roof of the building next door, and he did the calculation while the phone was still warm in his hand. The consignment was 420 kilograms of tomatoes. If the temperature breach had lasted more than 4 hours, the spoilage risk would be significant enough to make the delivery uncommercial. He could not afford to refund the cooperative and make the Ketu traders whole simultaneously. Not in the 6th week. Not with the account sitting at 182,000 naira after operating costs. He called Tobena. Tobena said 2 things. Pull the truck over and check every crate right now. And then, I'm calling the cooperative. Gibenga pulled over at a petrol station on the Sagamu interchange. Emmanuel stayed on the line while Gibenga opened the truck and checked crates for 14 minutes. The tomatoes at the front of the load were fine. The back 2 rows showed the beginning of softening on the bottom tier only. Not rot, not unsaleable, but borderline. 31 kilograms across 4 crates. They delivered the rest. Emmanuel called Alhaja Karimat before the truck arrived and told her exactly what had happened. He told her which crates, which tier, what the temperature reading had shown, and what he estimated the risk to be. He did not minimize it. She was quiet on the phone for 8 seconds. Then she said, "Bring them. I'll look myself." She looked herself. She bought the borderline 31 kilograms at a reduced price that she set, and Emmanuel did not argue with, because she was right, and he knew it. The 4 crates did not go to waste. The relationship did not break. The sensor was replaced that afternoon with a calibrated unit from an electronic supplier in Ikea that Tobena knew, at a cost of 12,000 naira Emmanuel had not budgeted for. 2 weeks later, Al-Haja Karima told the 2 other traders to expect him. He had not asked her to. She had told them because, she explained later, in fewer words than this, a man who tells you the truth when the truth costs him money is the only kind of man worth doing business with. By the end of the first year, Achebe Cold Logistics had 1 owned refrigerated truck, purchased outright in November with the first year's retained earnings, 2 leased vehicles, 6 farm partnerships across Ogun and Oyo states, and delivery contracts with 11 traders in 3 Lagos markets. The 417,000 naira had moved. Tobena's 200,000 had moved. The microfinance loan had been repaid 8 months ahead of its term. In the 3rd year, a supply chain consultancy working for a major supermarket chain reached out through a contact Al-Haja Karimat had made at a market association meeting. The supermarket needed a cold chain partner for fresh produce delivery across 3 Lagos branches. The contract value was 11 million naira for the first year, renewable on performance. Emmanuel read the contract 3 times over 2 evenings and gave it to a lawyer on Apapa Road who confirmed it was clean and pointed to 2 clauses Emmanuel should negotiate, which he did, and the consultancy accepted both changes without argument, which told Emmanuel something about the position he was now negotiating from. He called Tobena the night before the signing. It was 9:20 p.m. Tobena was just back from a delivery run. Emmanuel told him the number. Tobena was quiet for 6 seconds. Then he said, "Read it to me again." Emmanuel read it again. Tobena said 11 million. He said it the way you say a number that you need your brain to accept rather than just hear. He said, "That kitchen table in motion." Emmanuel said, "That kitchen table in motion." They did not say anything else for a moment. There was nothing left to say that the number had not already said better. Emmanuel signed the contract on a Wednesday morning in the lobby of the building at 14 Adiola Odeku Street, the same building where 4 years earlier he had watched 2 men discuss a prospectus through a glass wall from the driver's seat of a car that belonged to someone else. He sat in the chair on the client side of the desk now. The brown notebook was in his jacket pocket. He had not opened it for the meeting. He did not need to. He signed his name and capped the pen and looked out the window at the street below, at the cars moving in the late morning traffic. And he did not think about the $10 bill or the laugh that went with it. He thought about the book list. 214 entries, 16 to a page, in the back section of a notebook that had started as a record of fuel receipts and toll charges, and had become, over 9 years of waiting, a record of a man building a life in the hours when no one was watching him build anything. There is a version of this story where the $10 is the point, where the laugh is the fuel, and the whole engine of the story runs on what she did to him and what he did in return. But that is not the story Emmanuel Achebe lived. The $10 was not the beginning. It was the moment of clarity after 9 years of preparation, the moment that confirmed what he already knew. There was nothing left there worth waiting for. Nobody builds an empire on an insult. They build it on the 214 books. They build it on the Sunday evenings, ironing 3 shirts in rotation, so the fabric recovers. They build it on the discipline of not spending the lunch money for 31 months, of writing every receipt into a notebook that nobody asked for, of sitting with a brother at a kitchen table in Mushin until 8:47 at night and shaking hands on a number that required both of them to risk everything they had saved. The laugh is incidental. What cannot be laughed at is the preparation. You can diminish a man's $10. You cannot diminish what he has been building in the 12 hours a day you were not paying attention to. Some people prepare in silence for so long that the world forgets to watch them. Then one day they move, and the movement looks sudden to everyone who was not counting the books or reading the notebook or watching which days he didn't eat lunch. To them, it never felt sudden. It felt like the natural consequence of a long, patient discipline arriving at the moment it was designed for. What you carry in the waiting hours is yours. It does not belong to the person who handed you $10 and laughed. It belongs to you. And the day it becomes visible to the world will call it luck, or opportunity, or timing. You will know what it actually was. If you have ever used the overlooked hours, the waiting hours, the in-between hours, the hours where everyone assumed you were idle, to build something that later surprised the people who weren't watching, leave your answer in the comments. I want to know what you built in the margins. And if someone once handed you something small with a laugh, the kind that said you didn't matter, the kind that said this is all you're worth, what did you do with it? Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.